No, it was just the way things happened, It started off I didn't write, they wrote, then I started to write.
Most people remember George Harrison as the quiet Beatle, calm, spiritual, the guy who always seemed too peaceful to ever snap. He was that soft-spoken soul standing next to Lennon, McCartney, and Starr while they created legends like Yesterday, Let It Be, and Hey Jude. But behind that calm face, George carried a storm. One of those very same bandmates pulled him into one of the darkest, most humiliating chapters of his life, betraying his trust and leaving wounds that never truly healed. When George finally spoke out about it at 58, the truth hit like a thunderclap, shaking everything people thought they knew about him. Before we get to the part where he revealed who he could never forgive, we've got to rewind, way back to the start. Because to really understand why that betrayal stung so deep, you need to know where George came from. If you enjoy this type of stories, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Now let's move on with the story. Before fame, before the guitars and screaming crowds, he was just a kid from Liverpool, squeezed into a tiny 2-up, 2-down house at 12 Arnold Grove, born on February 25, 1943. His early life wasn't even close to glamorous. Winters were brutal. You could literally see your breath inside the house. And forget about cozy bathrooms. The only one they had was outside in the yard, freezing and rough. Inside that little place was his mother, Louise Harrison, full of warmth and energy, with a voice that neighbors joked could rattle the windows. But Louise had this sweet, strange ritual while she was pregnant. Every Sunday, she tuned into Radio India, letting the hypnotic sounds of sitars and tablas drift through their chilly home. She always said those sounds calmed the baby in her belly, and she was right. Years later, George admitted that Indian music was burned into his soul from before birth, like destiny humming his name. At school, George wasn't the loud type. He sat quietly, sketching guitars in the corners of his notebooks, while the teachers droned on. The classroom felt like a prison. Strict rules, dull lessons, no space for a dreamer. No guitars, no music, no magic. But then came the moment that changed everything. It was 1956. George was pedaling down his street when a song from someone's window stopped him cold. Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel was blasting through the air, raw, wild, and alive. He froze on the spot, just listening. George later said that moment felt like a lightning strike, like the whole world suddenly turned from black and white to color. Elvis's voice sounded like a doorway to another universe had opened, and 14-year-old George could feel it calling his name. That quiet boy from Arnold Grove had just found his fire, and he wasn't ever going back. George couldn't stop dreaming about a guitar. He begged his mother non-stop until she finally gave in. Even though money was tight, Louise Harrison scraped together £3 and 10 shillings to buy him one. That was a massive sacrifice for their family, but George didn't waste a second. He practiced until his fingertips cracked and bled, chasing every note like his life depended on it. He became obsessed with Lonnie Donegan's skiffle music, raw, loud, and full of pure energy. That fire pushed him to form his first ever band, the Rebels. It wasn't clean or polished. They were noisy, offbeat, and totally chaotic, but it was theirs, and that meant everything. Then destiny showed up again, this time on a bus. On his usual ride to school, George met another music-obsessed kid named Paul McCartney. Two teenagers, same route, same wild love for guitars. It was fate sitting right there in those bus seats. Paul later said George felt like his little brother, but back then, they were just two dreamers leaning over the seats, swapping chords and talking about stages they hadn't even seen yet. In March 1958, Paul brought George to try out for John Lennon's band, the Quarrymen. But the first time John laid eyes on him, he frowned. "He looks 12, John complained. But George wasn't backing down. Not a chance. One night on a bus, in near darkness, he pulled out his guitar and played the lead from Raunchy while the faint glow of a streetlight flashed through the window. When he finished, Lennon just stared. No words, no reaction. That silence said everything. George was in. So there they were, three kids from Liverpool with cheap guitars, rough voices, and massive dreams. They had no idea that the same bond that built them up would one day tear them apart. Ego, jealousy, and quiet betrayal would creep in, twisting that brotherhood into something painful, something George would carry for life. And right at the heart of that heartbreak, John Lennon, the man George once looked up to more than anyone. When the Beatles took over the world, selling out stadiums, breaking records, and rewriting music history, The cracks between George and John started to show. From the outside, they looked like four inseparable brothers, but behind the walls of Abbey Road's Studio 2, George began to feel like the outsider, the beetle who couldn't quite be heard. John, the same man who once encouraged him, started shutting him down. It began small, quiet comments, dismissive looks, but it hit deep. Around the mid-60s, George brought in a new song, If I Needed Someone, full of soul and emotion. He played it proudly, waiting for feedback, but John didn't even lift his head. "It's nothing," he muttered. "No support, no respect, just cold silence." That night, George went home and didn't say much. When his wife, Patty Boyd, asked what was wrong, he finally said, "John didn't even hear the song." That moment hit him like a punch. From then on, every time George grew as an artist, John seemed to drift further away, almost like he couldn't handle seeing George find his own light. John looked at him with that cold, smug grin and muttered, "It's just another trap." George didn't bite back, he just froze, keeping all that pain bottled up behind his calm face. But Ringo later said the look in George's eyes said it all, like someone had stabbed him right there in the studio. The quiet Beatle didn't make a scene, but inside, he was crumbling. The real breaking point came during the Let It Be sessions, and when the Get Back footage dropped in 2021, fans finally saw the truth. In one moment, George patiently tries to explain a guitar part, carefully walking John and Paul through his idea. But John, he just zones out, staring blankly into space, like George's voice didn't even exist. The silence in that room was suffocating. And then George, still calm but clearly done, said the line that would echo forever. "I'll play whatever you want, or I won't play at all." That sentence hit harder than any argument, pure heartbreak hidden behind restraint. When the Beatles finally broke apart, George didn't just walk away quietly. All those years of being dismissed and ignored finally exploded. The man who'd been treated like a background player was ready to speak his truth. In 1973, during John Lennon's wild, lost weekend in New York, fate threw them together again at a hotel. Everyone thought it'd be this sweet reunion, two old friends laughing about the past, but it didn't go that way. The moment John casually mentioned maybe performing together at Madison Square Garden, George snapped. His patience hit the wall. He shot up, face flushed with anger, and shouted, "Where were you when I needed you?" The room went dead silent, not a sound. Then, before anyone could blink, George reached over, ripped John's famous glasses right off his face, and hurled them across the floor. May Pang, John's girlfriend at the time, said John just froze, completely still, stunned into silence. For once, the fearless Lennon looked scared. The quiet Beatle he'd underestimated for years had finally let it all out. The frustration, the heartbreak, the humiliation of being pushed aside by someone he once loved like a brother. But that outburst wasn't the end of George's pain, not even close. Behind the explosive clashes with John, another battle had been brewing for years, quieter, colder, and even more personal. That was his hidden tension with Paul McCartney, the one that ate away at him long after the Beatles split. Fans usually focus on the Lennon drama, but real Beatles insiders know George's most painful struggle wasn't with John at all. It was with Paul. Paul's control didn't come with yelling or anger. It came wrapped in a smile, polite, calm, but suffocating. It started creeping in during the late 60s, when Paul began taking charge of everything. Every song, every riff, every chord. George would walk into the studio proud of the music he'd poured his heart into, ready to finally be heard. But before he could even tune his guitar, Paul would step in, politely but firmly, and start rearranging everything, changing parts, rewriting lines, and steering the whole track his way. To everyone else, it probably looked like teamwork, but to George, it felt like a slow erasing, like his ideas never really mattered. The frustration that started with Lennon's cold shoulder had now found a new face, and this one smiled while shutting him out. Beatles engineer Geoff Emerick remembered moments so tense you could almost feel the air crackle. Paul would literally stand over George's shoulder, directing every single note, like he didn't trust him to play his own guitar. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was that quiet kind of control that didn't make headlines but slowly broke a man down from the inside. George just wanted to be heard, but in that studio, it felt like his voice didn't count. Paul didn't suggest things. He commanded them. He told George exactly how to play guitar parts on songs George had written himself. It wasn't teamwork anymore. It was micromanagement on overdrive. Emmerich later said the studio air got suffocating, and that word couldn't have been more real. The energy in the room faded fast, replaced by tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Even George, known for being calm and collected, finally cracked. In a 1974 interview, he said something that stunned everyone. "Paul ruined me as a guitarist." He didn't mean technically, he meant emotionally. Paul's endless corrections, his constant control, and that way of brushing off George's creative spark tore at him piece by piece. The confidence that used to light him up got buried under frustration and doubt. Things hit rock bottom during the Maxwell's Silver Hammer sessions. George couldn't stand that song. Honestly, most of them couldn't. But Paul was relentless, pushing take after take, determined to get it perfect. The energy in the studio was dead, the vibe long gone. After hours of repetition, George leaned toward Ringo and muttered quietly, "Why are we doing this?" Paul heard him and snapped. "Because it's my song," he shot back coldly. That sharp tone hit George like ice. It was dripping with ego, and it left a scar that never really faded. In that moment, George realized something painful. Their friendship had turned into a power struggle, and he was tired of losing. But the real explosion came in January 1969, during the Let It Be filming, just the second day of shooting. George had finally had enough. He confronted Paul straight up about the way he kept controlling his guitar parts. Paul tried to soften it, saying, "I'm trying to help you, George." But George wasn't buying it. His patience snapped, and he fired back with a line that shook the room. "You don't listen to anyone else." That single sentence was pure honesty, raw and real. It was George's way of saying he felt invisible, trapped in a band where his ideas barely mattered. He wasn't just standing next to Lennon and McCartney, he was being buried under their shadows. Even decades later, that wound never healed. In 1987, when someone asked George if he'd ever think about starting another band with Paul, his answer came out fast. No hesitation, no fake smile. "I'd join a band with John," he said, "but not with Paul. It's nothing personal, just musical." Even near the end of his life, George carried that quiet, invisible ache, a wound Paul never really saw, and maybe never could. By then, it wasn't about fame or who wrote the biggest hits. It was about two old friends who could never quite find peace, no matter how much love or history they shared. By the late 1990s, George's final chapter had already begun, though the world had no idea. He'd already fought through throat cancer, then lung cancer, and finally a brain tumor that drained his strength but couldn't touch his spirit. Even while going through brutal radiation treatments, George refused to stop creating. Music was his medicine. That same calm strength that kept him grounded through years of tension and betrayal stayed right by his side till the very end. Even as his body weakened, his passion only burned brighter. He pushed himself to finish the songs that would become Brainwashed, his final masterpiece. His son, Donnie, later said he'd walk into the room and see his dad softly whispering melodies into a small tape recorder because his voice had grown too weak to sing out loud. Those gentle, fragile recordings held so much emotion. You could hear the urgency, the love, the quiet race against time. George wasn't ready to quit. Not now, not ever. As the weeks passed, the pain grew heavier, and every time the doctors came in, their eyes told the truth before their words did. George didn't need an explanation. He already knew what was coming. Calmly, he asked to be moved to Los Angeles, to a private home owned by security expert Gavin DeBecker. He wanted peace. A safe, quiet place to spend his final days with Olivia and Donnie, the two people who had stood beside him through everything. The room was arranged with care, warm golden light spilling across the walls, fresh flowers brightening every corner, and the soft hum of devotional chants playing in the background. Those sounds, sitars, tablas, and sacred Sanskrit verses had followed George ever since his spiritual awakening in 1966. This wasn't for appearance, it was who he truly was. Those chants weren't just music, they were comfort, they were peace. By late November 2001, George's strength began to slip away. His words came slower, his voice softer, but his spirit never dimmed. Close friends and family came in quiet waves to see him, just a few at a time. Ravi Shankar, his lifelong teacher and friend, sent loving messages from afar. Tom Petty broke down in tears on the phone, unable to speak through the emotion. Even Paul McCartney came to see him one last time. The reunion was gentle but heavy, full of silence and unspoken truth. They didn't need to apologize. The look between them said it all. Decades of rivalry, pain, and pride melted into a moment of fragile peace. Then came November 29th, 2001. The air in the room felt still, almost sacred. George's breathing slowed, his eyes softened, and that same quiet energy he carried all his life filled the space. Olivia and Donnie sat close, holding his hands as they recited sacred verses from the Bhagavad Gita, the same words that had guided his soul for decades. And then, in the softest whisper, a word only his family heard, George Harrison, the quiet beetle, the seeker, the soul who turned pain into peace, finally let go. His journey ended not with noise or fame, but with love, light, and silence, exactly the way he had lived. What came next left even those closest to the music world stunned. Staying true to his final wishes, George's ashes were taken to India and scattered into the sacred waters of the Ganges and Yamuna rivers. The ceremony was private, simple, and breathtaking. No flashing cameras, no crowd, no press. Just music, devotion, and peace flowing through the air. It was the farewell George had always dreamed of, humble, spiritual, and wrapped in the faith that had guided his heart for decades. That moment wasn't about goodbye. It was about freedom, and even though his voice went silent, his presence never did. George's legacy didn't fade with time. It grew louder, stronger, glowing brighter with every passing year. You can still feel his spirit in every chord of peace, love, and truth he ever played. George Harrison's story wasn't a tale of fame or money. It was about quiet strength and unshakable faith. He showed what it means to stay true to yourself when the world tries to drown you out. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but when George picked up a guitar, the sound went straight to the soul. Every note, every lyric carried meaning, honest, raw, and unforgettable. From the cold tension inside Abbey Road's studio to the warm, sacred banks of the Ganges, George's entire journey was a search for purpose, a war between ego and peace, between sound and silence. He lived through betrayal, heartbreak, and being pushed aside by the same people he once called brothers. But instead of turning bitter, he turned inward, finding strength in meditation, faith, and music. That's what made him different. George didn't crave fame. He sought peace. He wasn't chasing applause, he was chasing meaning. Even when the spotlight faded, his message only shined brighter. That true success isn't about crowds cheering your name. It's about understanding who you really are. After everything, the rejection, the heartbreak, the endless control, George still chose forgiveness. He showed the world that silence can carry more power than anger, that calm can outlast conflict, and that music can heal wounds deeper than words could ever reach. His songs like Something, Here Comes the Sun, and My Sweet Lord weren't just hits. They were soul confessions. You can feel every ounce of emotion, every trace of longing, every spark of faith inside them. That's why George Harrison's music still moves people, because it wasn't about perfection or fame. It was about truth. And that truth will keep echoing for generations to come. Even today, George's influence burns bright. In every guitarist bold enough to sound different, in every artist brave enough to blend faith with creativity, and in every soul that still believes peace can win. George proved that being the quiet one never meant weakness. It meant strength, wisdom, and grace. He taught the world that silence can be louder than shouting, and that calm can conquer chaos. Looking back on his story, the pain, the triumph, the healing, it's clear George Harrison didn't need the last word, because his music spoke louder than any argument ever could. His spirit still hums through every chord, every prayer, every sunrise that breaks the dark. Whether it's the hope in Here Comes the Sun or the devotion in My Sweet Lord, George's message still reaches straight to the heart, reminding us that peace, love, and truth never go out of style. If this story moved you, hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your favorite George moment, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's keep George's light shining by spreading his story to everyone who needs a little calm and soul in their playlist. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.